Hey guys, I am back with another video about character design because the last one was really well received. I got a lot of positive comments and also a lot of questions. Now the questions I've got were mostly about the workflow that I would use, like the brush that I use, the specific order of actions that I take to get to my end result. And I will be making a video on exactly my process probably in the next 2 weeks or so. We'll see. I've not been great at delivering on my promises, but we'll see how far I'll get. But I will say I'm always a little bit hesitant to teach one specific workflow. For those who don't know that, I'm a concept art teacher professionally at a school here in Belgium. I also have my own design mentorship at CGMA, as well as some other like I do private mentorships as well. But whenever I'm teaching, I try to really not put too much focus on a specific workflow or a specific tool. Of course, in a professional setting, like for example, I'm, aside from being a lecturer, I'm also a professional concept artist. I mainly work in indie games, focusing on character design actually. And when you're working as a professional, you need to be able to guarantee a certain level of finish, because consistency is key when you're a professional artist. You want to consistently perform an adequate level of finish on the designs that you want to deliver. But that's in a professional setting. I think when you're a student, when you're growing, and when you're just creating art for fun, instead of putting the focus on trying to develop a certain workflow, trying to develop a routine, something that you know works well, I think as a student it's actually a lot more important to mess around and even mess up and just try creating things in as many different ways as you can, doing different kinds of challenges, and making sure that you're adding in a lot of variation in the process that you're trying to learn more about. Because as you experiment, with every experiment you take away like one or two interesting aspects of that experiment that you might then eventually apply to your own workflow. But if I tell you this is the way to design a character and render a character, and that's the only thing that you're gonna do from then on, you'll always be a version of what I have taught you, instead of developing your own style, developing your own intuition, even your own interests in what works for you specifically when you are creating these kind of designs and illustrations. So delivering one specific workflow is not something that I'm gonna do. I will describe a couple of workflows in a future video, but that's a subject for another day. Just for now, make sure to keep in mind when we are trying to learn, we want to have a lot of variation in our workflow so that we learn as much as we can. Going too tunnel vision too quickly will actually stunt your growth, not in a huge way, but still be curious, be open-minded, and see how far you can get with these kind of designs. Now the character that I'm designing right now was one I did actually quite a while ago. At the end of my term last year, one of my students that then graduated to our concept art course, he's a DM, and we talked a bit, and I mentioned I'd never played D&D before, so he offered like, hey, would you guys like to join in a one-shot? And me and my friends and colleagues actually said, hell yeah, like that sounds like a lot of fun. So we had our first D&D experience with an ex-student of ours, which actually was a very fun experience. The ex-student is now becoming more and more of just a friend. It's funny kind of how these relationships tend to develop once the professional boundaries are kind of out of the picture. And this D&D one-shot was the first time I really had to think about a character that I would create. And in this case, for example, I had this little guy. He was a goblin ranger. And he had a bit of a, well, let's say interesting backstory. I'm not gonna disclose the backstory too much, but in our first session, I basically swindled a shopkeep for a pistol, and the pistol kind of became his trademark thing, as well as the little pointy stick that he used to play quote-unquote tag with some of his friends as a child. So those were really the two key features that this design had to contain. Aside from that, he's really just a poor little goblin guy. So design-wise, I didn't want to give him too much. I didn't want to be too flamboyant. I needed to be fairly sober, slightly unhinged, but also kind of innocent looking. So that's kind of what I'm going for with these thumbnails. You can definitely tell that some of the thumbnails lean a bit more into the unhinged, and some of them lean a bit more into the innocent side of things. There's definitely a few in the lineup here that I just don't like, but that's the design process, right? Some things work, some things don't work as well, and you kind of just move on from there. Now, this little guy, I really grew quite fond of him, and I will say there's a couple of mistakes that I still have to fix. The main thing that I'm working on myself is I need to learn how to be a bit more daring with the outfits, not keep things too simple. And that's mainly on my end, a lack of doing research, gathering references of different materials, different kind of clothing that I could basically put on top of this guy, because I didn't grab any references for this design process, which was the first mistake on my end. Usually when I'm designing something, I really put a lot of emphasis on the prior planning, because the prior planning and preparation is actually the main important thing that's gonna set your design up for success, and the lack of that might set it up for failure. Now, in my case, since I've done this for quite some time, I can get away with not doing as much research than maybe some other people could, but still sometimes I think I grow a little bit too comfortable in my own workflow, like I said earlier, which kind of prevents me from going more creative, from designing things in a way that actually becomes a bit more unique and stands out more. Because right now the main focus is in most of my designs like, oh yeah, cool anatomy, a little bit more exaggerated shapes, but very minimalistic outfits. But just a little bit more thorough planning could really emphasize the storytelling and give this guy a little bit more charm. Now, having said that, I'm still quite fond of him. I still think he's quite a nice little goblin guy. Again, the main features would be pointy stick, gun, and innocent / unhinged. So the combination of maybe some more visceral elements to the design with the more innocent look on his face should hopefully give you some of that idea. But the process here is fairly straightforward. From the moment I had my thumbnail, I decided, let's draw him again from a slightly more interesting perspective. So rather than doing just a straight-on front isometric view, I'll go for something that's more like a 3/4 top-down view, so that I can actually have a little bit more depth in my character, and that creates a more interesting pose to look at. Moving on from there, refining the lines, adding in some solid blacks for the ambient occlusion, where the shadows would be darkest, where the light has most difficulty reaching, and really making sure that those shapes are very clear and readable and graphic again. That's always going to be my main focus. Throughout the past couple of years, where I've been drawing quite a few characters, I've really taken almost like a specialty, like a specialization in just graphic and appealing shape design. That's really something that I'm quite proud of having accomplished, being able to push shapes into an interesting direction. And now, more recently, I'm trying to use that to my advantage to add more personality to my characters as well, maybe a little bit more expression in the face, but trying to be subtle with it as to not, go for a big smirk or grin, big angry face. No, more subtle changes sometimes are a lot more appealing and can carry a lot more weight actually than the more obvious statements. After I've done my line art, I just kind of shift into basic value sketch, and values doesn't necessarily mean black and white. You can do a value sketch monochromatically like what I'm doing right here, and I'm just kind of outlining the main general shapes of light and dark, since this guy isn't really, like, he's a bit more ambiently lit, which means the light is coming in from all around. So the way he's actually shaded, the way I'm adding in the shadows, is kind of more subtly, in a bit more of a soft way, adding that three-dimensional form to my little guy until he starts feeling a little bit more well-rounded and starts popping out. And from that point on, it's really just knowing your software and what the best way is to basically add in that first pop of color into the design. Now, adding in color after a value sketch is something that's fairly tricky, especially for more beginner artists, because you'll very easily end up with sort of muddy colors as a result. But you need to be a little bit more confident with these kind of things, and the main thing to take away with colorization and how to prevent muddy colors is you want to make sure that the shapes of light and dark remain readable and clearly separate. From the moment we have two shapes that should be visible separately and they are blending in together, whether it is because the colors are too close together or the values are too close together, that's when things start getting muddy. And the color is actually not necessarily the main cause of things. But in this case, for example, I'm trying to keep things simple by just picking a very limited color palette. I have the reds and the greens obviously working together. And those red and green colors are kind of almost creating a little bit of a rhythm between elements. Like, for example, the green skin, then you have the more red purplish bags under the eyes, and then again you have the more bright, well, eyeballs themselves, which is creating a little bit of a sandwich effect right there. Then with the red of the nose, that creates a pop of color and a focal point right at the center of the face. And then as you go down, you go from the green towards the red shirt to back to the lighter pants, and so on and so on. So it's arranging these shapes that contrast in areas so that they are clearly separate. So, like, for example, when I would create this shirt in a bit more of a, let's say, beigeish color, like, immediately things would start becoming less readable and therefore a bit more muddy. So that value separation is quite important. But for now, it's just kind of tweaking things, focusing on what's important on the design, and that's, in this case, his face. Like, whenever you're doing a character design, chances are that the focal point of the design itself is actually going to be the face. So that's where I spend most of my time rendering. The rest of the body actually isn't quite as important, because the viewer will mainly end up looking at the face anyway. So if that has a nice level of polish, and the surroundings have a believable enough level of polish, I think your design will probably be readable enough, and you'll end up with something that feels like as a nice whole that's nicely finished. Now, you'd always have to think, okay, after the face, what's going to be the second focal point? In this case, he has a very big pistol, which I think is quite a cool feature to have. So we'll just kind of, again, go back in, make sure that the materials read as a bit more metallic and wooden respectively, and put a little bit more polish on that until that again becomes clearly readable and there's no confusion there. That's really the only thing that I try to focus on. Readability. Readability and playfulness in a design, in my opinion, leads to a very sort of fun and successful character design. Now, the entire design process, again, is something that I will discuss a bit more in depth in a future video, because there's a lot to teach about that, and I have quite a few classes already that I teach, like I said, in my school here in Belgium, as well as my design mentorship at CJMA. But I will be creating some more videos to discuss that in the future. For now, here's my little guy. I hope you like him. And yeah, again, thank you so much for watching. If you have any specific requests that you'd like to see in the future, just let me know, and I'll see what I can do to create some nice and interesting videos. So thank you guys again, and take care.